Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The main reason why I love covering Star Wars so much is not like one specific thing. It's just like the overall richness and complexity of the lore. You know, when people ask me, hey, Alan, why don't you do a deep dive into other franchises? Oftentimes the problem I have is, one, I'm lazy, and two, like, you just don't have that same type of depth in a lot of other franchises. That's the simple truth. Only in Star Wars can you come up with some crazy theories like in my last video about how moisture farming is actually just a control mechanism used by the Hutts to maintain stability on their planet. And this wasn't like a throwaway idea, it was a 20-minute video. And actually, I was able to connect the dots in a way where everything seems to make sense. I actually really enjoyed working on that moisture farming theory because it further paints the Hutts as completely evil, but also brilliant masterminds at exploiting labor. This all fits perfectly into their backstory and lore and what we know about their species. And at the same time, it also shows us how difficult and futile a situation is on a planet like Tatooine for young Luke and Anakin. The moisture farming as a control mechanism theory fits almost too well, and maybe that's a part of the plan. Maybe, somewhere Lucasfilm Story Group has these actual theories written down and they allow the creators to kind of give clues to people like us to figure out things for ourselves. Maybe it's all a part of the plan. I, for one, would love to get my hands on, whatever starter pack all Star Wars authors and scriptwriters get when they start an entry in Star Wars. I imagine Lucasfilm Story Group gives these creators a lot of reading material and some guidance. And my theory has always been that there are all of these larger ideas in Star Wars that the story group knows about, but they don't really want the creators to tell us straight up, like, this is how the universe works. And so they create all these little clues, and if you actually watch the entirety of Star Wars, which I have, you'll start connecting the dots and figuring out things like, oh, this isn't a coincidence. This is connected to that, which is connected to that. It's basically conspiracy theories, but you're not hurting anyone because it's in Star Wars. But anyway, I stumbled upon another crazy theory recently when I was just thinking up video ideas for this channel, and it kind of ties together two of the most magical elements of Star Wars together. One is the Force, this magical field that gives the Jedi and Sith all of their powers and is probably the root of every major conflict in Star Wars history. And the other one is FTL travel via hyperspace, which in recent years has grown more and more strange. So hyperspace and the Force are also two of the more difficult and confusing concepts to understand in Star Wars. So, I'm going to give you guys a basic definition and try to explain how these two elements work. The Force is an all-pervasive energy field generated by all living things. It binds and connects the galaxy together on both a physical and metaphysical level. The Force has two complementary aspects. The living Force, this is the immediate flowing energy of life itself, the thoughts, feelings, and vitality of every organism, which can be sensed directly and grants Jedi their intuitive perceptions and precognition. Force users are able to connect to the Force thanks to microorganisms inside their bodies known as midichlorians, which can also be found in all living beings. A Jedi who can control the midichlorians can properly wield the living Force with great effect and change the environment around them. The second aspect of the Force is a little bit more confusing. It is the cosmic Force, and it's kind of like the underlying current of the Force. It's the body of the Force. And so the living Force comes from the cosmic Force and feeds back into it. As do all living things in consciousness when they die. They become a part of the cosmic Force. For instance, a Jedi who is in tuned enough with the Force can even preserve their essence and consciousness as they flow back to the cosmic Force. This phenomenon is known to us as Force ghosting, and it's from these individuals and also extremely powerful Sith Lords like Darth Plagueis, who tried his best to bend the cosmic Force to his will, that we get these rumors that the cosmic Force also has a consciousness of its own. And so when a Jedi talks about the will of the Force and, giving themselves up to it, it's not just a random current, but an actual consciousness. You can call it a god or some kind of vast intelligence. And if you are interested in this, I recommend you head over to Jedha and talk to some of the pilgrims that live there. So now let's move on to hyperspace. In Star Wars, just like here in our own galaxy, FTL speed travel is fundamentally impossible in the normal dimension. It's really just a physics problem. The closer we get to the speed of light, the more our mass increases, and also time slows down relative to the outside world. It is therefore impossible to push anything with mass to faster than light speeds. The closest we've gotten to FTL speeds is the acceleration of protons and heavy ions using the Large Hadron Collider. And even then, we've only hit 99.9999991% of light speed. It would actually take an immense amount of energy to kind of reach those last few fractions of a percent of light speed. And so, yeah, diminishing returns when you get to that speed. So there have always been different types of theories on how we could potentially travel faster than light speed, and one of them involves decreasing the distance between 2 points. Okay, so I'm going to use a visual aid here. So let's say this is the galaxy, and you want to travel from this point to that point, from one end to another. It would take about 156 million years for our fastest known vehicle, which is the Parker Solar Probe. It's capable of reaching 430,000 miles per hour, or just 0.064% of light speed. That's way too long of a time to travel that distance, but what if we could, bend space? Black holes do it. Even our planet Earth, with its gravitational pull, bends space to a certain degree. So we have point A and point B, and we can bend space, which means this flat plane can suddenly be turned into something not so flat like this. And suddenly this point and this point are very close together. We just kind of have to punch through that space in between with what's known as a wormhole. That allows us to travel across the entire galaxy almost instantaneously, or at least much faster than we normally could. I believe that hyperspace is this extra dimension, that space between the paper. Using a device known as hyperdrives, starships can essentially create these wormholes using an exotic and powerful fuel known as hypermatter, which creates ripples in the space and time matrix. And then we have a device known as the null quantum field generator, which maintains that tunnel in which the ship travels, so it doesn't collapse. And so this dimension, hyperspace, is running parallel to real space. We know that gravity wells in real space created by stars and black holes exist in hyperspace, and if you fly near one, it will cause problems. You might revert back to real space. However, for one reason or another, either the distance between the locations is shorter in hyperspace, or maybe vessels can just fly much faster. We also know that while hyperspace travel is much faster than real space travel, it's not instantaneous. For instance, traveling across the entire galaxy might take you a few days, and that's only if you find the right hyperspace lanes. And so I guess what's happening is, instead of just one fold that really brings things really close like this would probably be almost instantaneous travel across the galaxy. What we have are kind of multiple little folds. I guess you could call them ripples in time and space, which would obviously require less power and be, less volatile. So what you have is kind of this effect, right? So it's like an accordion effect where you're still bending space, you're still decreasing the distance from point A and point B. That's what I think hyperspace is. Also, it should be mentioned that when you're in hyperspace, a bubble is formed around the ship and the people inside the ship that isolates them from real space relativistic effects. This means if you travel from Coruscant to the Outer Rim, a million years won't pass or something. This single piece of technology, the hyperdrive, is why galactic civilization thrived and spread across the galaxy. Okay, so we understand how the Force works, and we kind of understand how hyperspace works and what a hyperdrive is, but how did the first explorers figure out what hyperspace was? Well, according to the new canon, which might piss some people off, I get it, one of the theories is ancient mariners observed giant space whales known as Purgils disappearing into what looks like a wormhole of some kind. And since Purgils were appearing everywhere and no one knew how they got into deep space, people connected the dots and figured out that these Purgils were using FTL travel somehow. This is how early civilizations discovered what hyperspace was. So how do these space whales actually go into hyperspace? Well, you guys remember when Ezra Bridger first makes contact with those space whales near that Imperial gas refinery? He managed to maintain a very close connection to that whale, something that went beyond just a normal connection to an animal, in my opinion. It's almost as if the space whale has a much more intimate connection to the Force than other animals. Maybe a higher midichlorian count or some special type of organ. Or maybe because it's just such a large creature, has a larger presence in the Force. Now, upon closer inspection of these animals, you'll find that there is no hyperdrive on a Purgil, right? The hyperdrive came after, it was inspired by the Purgil. So how do these things get into hyperspace, right? It's an organic being. There's no way that a creature's organs can produce enough energy to actually ripple the space-time fabric. Unless, of course, they're using the Force to do this. I mean, think about the giant Loth wolves that Ezra Bridger befriends on Lothal. These were also special creatures like the Purgil, almost sentient in their own way. One seemed to embody the spirit of his master Kanan Jarrus, or at least what the Force intended for Kanan to do. These wolves are able to literally emerge from the grass fields and also can disappear in thin air and enter a hyperspace-like tunnel that allows them to travel through another dimensional plane and get to the other side of the planet in relatively short time. These wolves also don't have hyperdrives. Now, these wolves eventually lead Ezra and his crew to a mural of the Mortis gods drawn on the walls of the Lothal Jedi Temple. This turns into a portal that leads Ezra to what's known as the World in Between Worlds. The World in Between Worlds is most likely hyperspace, or a small little pocket dimension that is connected to hyperspace. When Ezra walks through it, he can see several paths with numerous portals to specific moments in time and space. I believe these moments are Force nexuses, or moments on the timeline that are extremely important to the cosmic Force, like the birth of Anakin Skywalker, or Ahsoka Tano facing Darth Vader in a duel on Malachor. For one reason or another, the Cosmic Force sent those wolves to retrieve Ezra Bridger so that he could enter the World in Between Worlds and save Ahsoka. This is what I mean when I say that the Force has a will of its own, a plan. And it's not really provable, but as we see, Ezra is guided by a series of different entities. Now, what's really interesting about the World in Between Worlds is that it's very clear to me that time is not linear in this crazy pocket dimension. Ezra can use these doors to see many moments in history, including in the past and also in the future, which means that in this dimension, time works again very differently. Which reminds me of another conversation that I heard in the Clone Wars in the last year of the conflict between Grandmaster Yoda and the Force Spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn.
See the future. You can.
I exist where there is no future or past.
A place where there's no future and no past. That means, again, a place where time is not linear. Just like in the World Between Worlds. And maybe, just maybe, that is also how it works in hyperspace. We've never actually seen anyone use hyperspace for time travel, but the fact that ships don't experience any noticeable time dilation when moving at superluminal speeds suggests that in some ways time itself bends there. Maybe when you're in hyperspace, you're not just moving across the galaxy, you're stepping outside of the flow of time. And so my conclusion is that hyperspace isn't just some parallel dimension where you can travel FTL speeds, it's the material side of the Force's metaphysics. I mean, humans were never meant to brute force their way into this dimension, but then again, when have humans ever obeyed, what nature wants it to do? And so hyperspace might be the very body of the cosmic Force as far as we know. This endless dimension where, physics function in a very strange and foreign way. This is why Force users, whether they be Purgil or early Jedi navigators or the navigators used by the Chiss, have a certain level of proficiency in navigating through hyperspace. It's also how Force ghosts and spirits are able to appear anywhere in the galaxy in a split second. The living Force, the energy field that is being manipulated by the Jedi and other Force users, most likely has to use hyperspace to travel across the galaxy. And they would have to because the Force's energy, and even energy like light, has a speed at which it travels. And so unless we're talking about quantum mechanics and entanglement, there's really no way to move information or energy across the galaxy instantaneously. So when Luke Skywalker projects himself from Ahch-To to Crate, the living Force still has to make that trip. And I'm guessing it's done in the hyperspace realm. It's also probably how Obi-Wan Kenobi senses Aldron's destruction while they're flying in hyperspace many sectors away. There's a certain beauty to this idea, right? It's an attempt to use science to explain spirituality, the power and beliefs of the Jedi. It's more something the Sith would do, honestly, because the Jedi are too rigid and, respectful of the Force. But this really does open up Star Wars in a new direction that I think can be really exciting. And actually makes me rethink the whole Ahsoka series coming out, which will be dealing with these very subjects. Heck, they may even rope in Baby Yogurt to the storyline as well. He's immensely powerful. Growing up, I've always interacted with a variety of different belief systems and religious groups, spiritual groups, and while I'm not a believer or member of any of those organizations, I've always held this thought that it'd be kind of sad if there were no higher power in the world, right? It'd be depressing if everything were just random and there was no purpose. But being a rational being, I've always believed that we can explain a lot of the supernatural things that we've seen in our history through science. And I think as science progresses and we begin to explore the galaxy more and more and develop new theories on how, physics work, we'll be able to kind of disprove a lot of old superstitions. But I also think there's the possibility that we might find something that is truly magical that will profoundly change how we view how the galaxy works. It shouldn't surprise you to know that many of the greatest minds in history were quite spiritual in their own way, and some were actually very religious as well. Isaac Newton, the most brilliant thinker in human history, wrote more about theology and biblical prophecies than physics. Galileo was a devout Catholic. Albert Einstein was constantly in awe of the mysteries he was unraveling and was deeply spiritual. And that's because if you do have that rational mind, the more you learn, the more you realize how infinite the universe is and how infinite the pursuit of knowledge is, you eventually become humbled by the sheer scope of all that you do not understand, at which point you begin to realize that having, absolute beliefs about anything is quite silly. There are all these things out there that are left unknown. And that is why I love science fiction and concepts like hyperspace. I love the fact that people are just trying to figure out things, and some people dare ask, what if we could do these things? What if we could travel faster than the speed of light? What if we could manipulate our environment through some kind of energy field that we just haven't discovered yet? And so with these videos, it's not just about trying to understand how the lore works, it's really just trying to develop kind of a curiosity for learning, right? It's a lifelong skill that you kind of have to develop, and it eventually grows into something that is super rewarding and will fill your spare time with a lot of positivity. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.